First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out. I know it was not easy to get up this morning. I do have a quick question before we get started. Who went to Cake versus Bruno last night? Let's see, or did most people go? Did you guys go to, who went to Cake? Hands up. Okay, good. Did you guys enjoy it? Yeah? It's one thing, I've been with Salesforce for nearly 6 years, and I feel like we're getting better at the concerts sometimes than the actual conference itself. It's going to turn into a fully fledged Stockwood someday. Anyway, let's get started. Today I'm going to talk about multi-device design and development. I decided I wasn't going to, pound you guys with hardcore code or anything like that. We're going to keep it at a very high level. And I'm going to step through some of the processes and some of the systems that we use inside of Salesforce when developing both our mobile strategy, our tablet strategy, etc., to do it across clouds. So, for example, with our Sales Cloud, our Service Cloud, and then also with our Salesforce One, and also our new Lightning platform that we released this week as well. So, the first question I'm going to ask you guys is, hands up, who thinks their business website works properly on a mobile? There's about 3 hands up in the air, which is scary. It's interesting that a lot of businesses, they think of their corporate websites, they put so much effort and time into their products, but they don't think about their actual first touch base, which is their actual own website. I'm going to talk today both about product development, but I'm also going to look at the marketing side of the house as well in the sense of websites. At the end of the day, it's all the same technology, it's all the same theory, and I feel like it can be put into practice on both sides of the house. Another way as well, who here has an official, what I'm going to call multi-device strategy? Okay, interesting. More hands up for the multi-device strategy, yet a lot of people didn't put their hands up for their website to start with, which is a very interesting thing. I feel like when it comes to multi-device strategy for a business and leading that to success, it really is the same strategy sometimes both on the product side as well as the marketing side of the house. Interestingly enough, one of the things is, right now in the world, there's more devices, if we just count phones, than humans in the world. And I mean active ones. That's a very scary thought, considering there's a couple of billion people on the planet. It's one of those things that people don't realize that the world is really shifting. We have an idea, we say we're going to get to it, but we don't really truly understand how actually impactful it's going to be over the next couple of years. I don't know if any of you have ever listened to Mary Meeker. She does a fantastic internet trends deck every year. She goes through, what's happening in the space. She's probably one of the most reliable sources of really how the industry in general is turning out. This is one of her slides, which is the global smartphone quarterly units shipped. You can see, for example, in the last 3 years, that curve is exponentially growing. And as I said, there's that many devices in the world that it's almost more than the population. Another one which is really interesting for me personally is in the last 10 years, if you look at the left-hand side of this graph, from 95 all the way up to 2009, desktop and notebooks, for example, slowly growing, but it was about 20. Tablets on their own, for example, has already surpassed them within the last 2 years. People think there's a wave coming. This wave is going to be bigger than anything that's ever happened before. And it's one of the main reasons when we talk about multi-device strategy and design and development, it is really, really going to be important and critical to your business success as you go forward. In fact, one of the interesting stats that when I was looking up for things to kind of shock and awe people, which I thought was very interesting, is 50% of all US adults use their smartphone to make purchase decisions in store. This kind of scares me a little bit because I realize I do this myself a lot when I'm walking around town. In fact, another stat I found was actually 75% of Americans bring their phones to the bathroom. That's how much we live with our phones. I feel like 6, 7, 8 years ago, I don't know how I got across town without Google Maps. Now I'm like, I use my phone to Uber, I use my phone to do everything, even travel, for example. I feel like I'm actually lost without it. I feel like there's a part of me missing. And that's the way, people's psychological aspects of how they're looking at and consuming your business, your products, and even the marketing, is they're doing it all on their phone these days. Yes, they're working, for example, on desktops during 9 to 5 when they're sitting at their desks. But the majority of people outside of that, when they really are going to, especially if you're in the B2C, business to consumer area, and you're selling a product like that, I think a lot of companies underutilize exactly how important the phone and tablet is to their actual business success. There's a really interesting stat as well, which if you've seen social networks, there's an inflection point happening right now with Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchats, all of them. Originally, their traffic growth was in and around, let's say it was 20 million, for example. When they actually launched their multi-device strategy, when they launched their actual products to work on iPhones and Androids, they saw traffic double. And in fact, I think the latest on Facebook is 35% of all their traffic goes via mobile right now. There's sites in Asia and in China, for example, where their actual strategies where they went from 90% usage on desktop to 10% usage on desktop in 24 months. This is the sort of thing when we talk about when getting ready for this kind of wave of technology, is that it'll be an inflection point in your business. And I'm sure you guys will see this yourselves in the apps that you're building and et cetera. Up to now, responsive and multi-device strategy has really been about breaking points. There was 3 main break points. There was, we had our desktop, we had our tablet, and we had our phone. And up to kind of this year, it's all been about, we're going to make it work on about 300 pixels. We're going to make it work on about 800 pixels. Or we're going to make it work on, a large screen that's maybe 1,500 pixels. Pixels are kind of gone a little bit. With the launch of, for example, I'm going to call it the phablet, which is the iPhone 6 Plus and other devices like that, the phones now have larger resolutions because of the way the pixels work on the phone than the actual desktop monitors, which is a little bit scary. So this idea of, making something look beautiful doesn't necessarily work anymore because, yes, we can target a device, and yes, we can do that thing, but it doesn't necessarily work. Like, for example, when I look at, for example, this is a colorful example of just Samsung's range. This is how many phones and tablets they've launched in the last 2 years. Size and pixel and breakpoints doesn't work anymore. You have to make it fluid so that it will actually break properly across a lot of different devices. And this is kind of, just the phone and tablet aspect to it. We haven't even got into, when I talk about multi-device, I didn't say phone and tablet. I mean, like, imagine you see with the wearables now, et cetera, and even in cars and Xboxes and TVs and being smarter like that. People are going to consume your product in ways that you've no idea 5 years from now, for example. And when we talk about designers and developers, it's kind of overwhelming, kind of how many phones and testing you need to do and the way it is. So I feel like, as I said, forget the breakpoints and forget trying to design for a particular device. It is no longer going to work. It's no longer scalable in that way. We got to think about it in a much more simpler way and make it easier for us to design and develop. As I said, of course, there's the Apple released their new watch. There's kind of a watch craze going on right now. It's interesting to see, even though we can build responsive designs for these new, smart watches, etc., there's going to be devices, there's going to be scenarios where your product will need to work in something that doesn't even exist a year from now. And it's not as if you're going to play catch-up where you're going to have to continuously go back and change your product or make it adapt for it. So how do we build and make sure that it's bulletproof for the future? I don't know if anyone knows a company called 37 Signals. They're one of, I consider, really good at designing and developing for this multi-device scenario. They have this idea that the interface is your product. Doesn't matter if it's your app or your website, but what people see is what you're selling. For example, perception is everything. If a user looks at your product and it doesn't necessarily work when they come onto whatever device or there's a slight thing to it, they will see the gaps in it. Users are becoming more and more conscious of what works. One of the big aspects for Salesforce is we talk about trust all the time. Trust to our customers, trust to our platform. And trust isn't necessarily just about performance and keeping it up, but it's also a perception. Perception that it will work. Perception that it will always perform no matter where and when. So in that sense, when we actually look at multi-devices and when we're designing and developing for these, we need to make it count. We can't just decide, oh, we need to get it out here, and then we'll come back and fix it. Users will, once you lose a user, they're gone. It's very hard to get them back. So putting your best foot forward is very, very important. A lot of companies, when I sit down, I talk to them about user experience and design and development, and their multi-device strategy. They say, well, we don't really have time. I really think that's bullshit, if I'm being honest with you. They think about it in a very one-dimensional way. They go, oh, we'll just launch it on an iPhone, and we'll figure it out from there, and we'll see what's successful. I truly am a believer when it comes to this industry that there is no such thing as no. It's about time and money. Pretty much anything can be achieved. And I think with a degree of common sense, you can pretty much build a product or an app in the time frame that you need to do. If there's any proof to that, I always laugh. I show customers, I'm like, look at the hackathons that companies run. Our $1 million one on Friday. There's apps that came out of that after 48 hours of development that are better than some of the actual real apps out in the world. It's a little bit scary what a little bit of passion, time, and the right execution can actually achieve. So let's go through some of the things that we do in Salesforce and how we actually look about the world in the sense of this multi-device design development. First of all, make it universally usable. Instead of designing for each device, which is getting impossible, by the way, design for every device. In the designers, from the design aspect, I see this as a look at, yes, we're going to continuously have breakpoints. For example, the layout or the flow of your app or user experience may change, but it won't change dramatically across where it breaks. But look at, for example, start at the phone and work up. It's very easy to start with bare bones and add to it, then try to start at a desktop, look at your current app, and strip away things. You need to simplify in that sense. What is the real usage of your product? What do users really care about? You need to identify those key scenarios, those key flows that make your product successful, and make sure that they work from mobile up onwards. The other aspect when I say, for example, design for every device is when I looked at that previous screen when we saw all the different phone sizes, we can't make it set width. We can't make it work on, for example, exactly 600 pixels, because if you look at the phones and the resolutions now, they break at 650, 400, 550. They all have different DPIs. Our screens here are 72. The iPhones are, for example, 300. They could be larger when we start talking about 4K screens in the future, for example. Another aspect is build it with the future in mind. A lot of companies, when they say they don't have time, when I say they have a very one mindset of how they build, is they think about it as, oh, I got to build an iPhone app, or I got to make sure our product works on an iPhone. And the first thing they think of is they have to build a native Xcode app. That's not true. Yes, the container can be Xcode, and yes, it can be wrapped on that. But the majority of all of the products that we build in Salesforce, and the majority of companies, the smart ones I know going forward, build it in using HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. There's a couple of reasons for this. First reason is it will scale across any device, in the sense of you have an application that works on the web that is responsive and adaptive. It's going to work when you wrap it in a container on Xcode and push it out to the App Store. It will work on the majority of all phones and the majority of all tablets going forward. With these being standardized now, if anyone remembers the days of when we still had to debug for IE6 and get everything to work like that, it was almost impossible because CSS and HTML work differently in every browser. I think if we look at devices and browsers right now, I think there's something like 2,000 plus or something in the sense of how many different ones there is. And with this standardization of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, we're able to design and develop not only for nearly every device right now, but pretty much every device going forward. It will probably render perfectly no matter what the iOS is, no matter what the device is, and all the ones that are going, for example, even on a car dashboard, they're still going to render web pages in the same way as they currently do now. Yeah, there's subtle nuances between, I'm going to say like an Android and an iOS, etc. But the chances are It's much easier to take a baseline product built in this and adapt it to one of those things than build it all in Xcode on an iPhone, then try and build it all in Android, and then try and build it all in web. So the idea is that you have one code base that you can easily manipulate across all of it. One other thing that when we look about design and development is a lot of people right now, when they think about it, unless you're building an image app, for example, with photos, etc. I talked about the resolution sizes of a phone and the desktop, for example. With these, touch gestures with the pinch and zoom, etc. Images are great when they're photos, but for example, normally 5-6 years ago, I would have designed an application. I would have had all these icons in the application or website, and I would have exported them as PNGs or whatever it may be. Now we're able to use, a font icon or icon fonts to let them scale. And this means no matter how the screen resolution is, no matter what the user has turned up for their default font sizes, etc., the icons can scale to a perfect, look really clean and crisp. This is our actual custom icon font set that we built for Salesforce 1 and Lightning. You can do that yourself. There's a lot of default ones out there, like Awesome Font and a few others. There's a lot of them you Google, but you're able to build your own ones as well. Pretty much, we use a tool called Sketch. We create a lot of our product designs in that, and we'll export these, as SVGs, and we'll actually build icon sets out of it. The other great thing as well is, when we talk, and I'll come and talk about performance in a little bit, is because the user has, loads one web page, they load the entire font set. And that way then, you cut down on the rendering time of pages as well. As well as, I just touched on SVGs. Unless it's photos, I feel like all images right now can be done using SVGs. I don't know if anyone's seeing, and I could pull it up in a few minutes, but using SVGs, you can pretty much replicate anything. I've seen some people replicate using SVGs and CSS, like a perfect iPhone model, for example, in a browser window. This is an example of some of the icons that we use because you can't necessarily do multicolor and tone inside of fonts. Until they're able to do that, we'll obviously have to do this. But I feel like the same way, the reason why we use the icon sets and the font ones is that these will render at any resolution. I can go into my app, I could change the size of one of these images from 50 pixels to 5,000 pixels. It's still going to be as clean and crisp as possible. It's also, they actually load pretty fast as well. Like for example, if you're going to have a ton of images right now inside your applications, imagine how they all add up eventually and how they'll actually render. You're going to have to export different images for different sizes based on the resolution of the users and the user's screen. And so in this case, these will work on nearly every single device as well, and they're a great way to make sure that your product will actually look very clean and very crisp. Design real content. This is a very interesting one for me. Coming from Europe, working with Salesforce both in EMEA and in America, I've seen a lot of design teams try and design user flows and visually design pages for both websites and also for applications with dummy content. They use a lorem ipsum, they use like placeholder images. You have this beautiful looking wireframe and there's beautiful looking design. But what really happens is by the time your marketing guys or your doc guys come around or your PMs and they put in the content, it starts to get scary. The designers hadn't allowed for certain overflow or whatever it may be. It's also interesting when it comes to localization about this. A rule of thumb that I use is, for example, everything that we have in English, I allow 25% extra space, especially when it comes to text, so that when we translate it into German or in other languages, we have the extra room. As I say, nothing is designed beautiful until I've seen the real content in it. It's very easy to have a wireframe or something that has dummy content in it, but when we put real content in it, it actually can change and actually make a design look terrible. So even though I know, you can have, you want everything up front, it is very useful and very handy for both the designers and the developers to have real content in their areas. So it's something to be very conscious about and something that's usually overlooked. Also, don't forget about touch. We talked about multi-design and development. A lot of this right now is about thumbs and fingers. They're not mouse pointers. I don't know about you, but it's pretty hard if you've got big paws and you're trying to get through a phone these days. And I've seen a lot of applications that try to cram as much in as possible, and it makes it really awkward. And I think as well, when we talk about multi-device design and development, a lot of people think about responsive and adaptive, where that, the breakpoints, the content gets smaller, we just shrink it, we change the layout. That's not necessarily the case. I feel like, we can import different style sheets, we can change the layout dramatically from desktop to touch devices. And I think one of the things when it comes to touch devices, people really underestimate when it comes to usability and it comes to design and development, the actual touch points for the actions or CTAs or whatever that you need to actually interact with on the screen. So that's one huge aspect to it that people, underestimate, especially as well, like for example, on the desktop side of things, with Windows right now and they're making screens touchable, they have desktop computers that people are using gestures on their thing. Another aspect as well to it as well is a lot of people will roll over, on hover effects for desktop, for clue tips or whatever it may be, drop-down menus, etc. That doesn't work on a tablet or on a phone. A lot of people are like, they'll think, oh, they'll tap on that or they. That's not the point. That's not the case. You need to rethink necessarily how the design and how the development process will change basically when you include touch interactions. Performance. I cannot speak enough about performance. I would say I'm a designer at heart, but I feel like a lot of people underestimate performance. And performance can be done in multiple ways. Yes, there's the, make the servers faster, reduce the latency, call the database quicker, et cetera, et cetera. And that's actual physical performance. But there's also this perception of performance. So for example, if anyone's seen certain apps, what they've started to do is they lazy load things in. Users hate spinners. They hate spinners. What they've started to do now, and it's almost like a mindset, it's like a psychological thing, is we start to load it in slowly. For example, give them what you can serve right now, and then if you need to wait and the call comes, lazy load it in a little bit. You'll see, I don't know if anyone's using, the Facebook paper app. They do it for every single page in it. It shows the little gray boxes, then the content nicely fades in, and that's what we call, the performance from a perspective standpoint. There's this perception that it's loading and that it's interacting straight away. I had a guy yesterday, he was sitting down, we were talking about usability, and we talked about overlays for tablet designs. And he was like, oh, I don't want the user to go to the next page. I don't want them to have to reload the page to get to wherever they need to do to edit the screen or edit the form or whatever it may be. And he was using overlays, using these really horrible overlays on top of his app. And I was like, why have you got this really nice dark background on the left, the top and the sides? He goes, oh, because when I oriented and he turned the screen, he's like, that's the fixed width of where it was. And I was like, but why aren't you utilizing this space? Like, why isn't it adaptive and responsive? He's like, well, the feedback I've got from users is when they click on it, if I bring them to another page, they feel like it's too many clicks. Even though they're doing the same amount of clicks to pop the overlay, they think it's too many clicks. And I was like, well, what about instead of, refreshing the page, what about just let it roll, animate it up. So it looks like it's an overlay, but utilize the full side of the screen. And there's this idea, especially when it comes to content creation or content editing, a lot of, the products that we build, especially Salesforce, there's a lot of fields, a lot of different aspects. We need to utilize this screen space as much as possible. So in that sense, performance is very important. Just to give you an idea of what users actually expect, it's very interesting when we talk about phone, tablet, and desktop, but all users to expect your website or your app to load in 2 seconds or less. You would be shocked how many apps don't load in 2 seconds. And then I get a spinner for 10 seconds, for example. Phone, 34% of all users. I think that phone's a lot lower because, we're on LTE, we're on 3G, it's not always reliable, especially if it's a web app. Tablet, though, is amazing that almost 70% of users expect your website, your app to load within 2 seconds, and it's 47% for desktop. I think desktop, we think about work and power users. I think they understand that there's a lot more going to be loaded. A lot of people who design for phone and tablet and desktop, and they have let's say they have one app or one website that is responsive and adaptive, is they don't load in things properly. So for example, even though you have this beautiful video on your desktop, it makes sense. People are on either nice fast Wi-Fi or on their Ethernet. But when you're on a phone or your tablet and you're sitting on a train, no user wants to see a video. Like, no one wants you to preload it before they actually do it. Otherwise, you're going to be spinning, waiting for this thing to go. So I feel like a lot of people, when you think about the content that you're loading and your experience of what you're building, make sure that it's fast. Make sure that you're actually giving them the content that they need, and think about the scenario that they're in. Another aspect as well as this is performance, in the sense of, especially when it comes to apps, is performance on phones. A lot of people think of offline as my app needs to work fully offline. That's not the case. If your app is web reliant and a user drops out of signal, for example, there's this perception that sometimes a lot of them you'll get, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an app that I have, but there's many apps where, for example, I drop out of signal and it pops a little error saying there's no Wi-Fi things. The user knows that they're going in and out. You don't need and the app will restart when they click OK. That is one of the most annoying experiences possible to a user. Usually what they'll shut it down and they'll go use another app or something along that lines. So when it comes to offline, have it to make sure that when you are building apps that need to be online for the experience to work perfectly, make sure that you allow some lag or leeway so that if they do dip out and come back on, you're not prompting that it needs to restart or start up again because they're offline. There is a lot of apps who go out there and do, I think Evernote does a great job of it, of being fully offline. I think fully offline is when I really think about, content creation or content editing. You're sitting on a plane, you want to get through a bunch of tasks or notes or whatever it may be. But I think a lot of companies overemphasize a true offline experience when they should only really look at when they're dipping in and out of coverage. For example, you're on the Muni or the BART or whatever it may be. Just to give you some really scary stats, for every second that your page loads, this is what happens. So you get minus 11% in page views. So for example, your bounce rate will increase at 11% for every second that your page has to load. Your conversions will be reduced by 7%, and your customer satisfaction, that would be your app or website, will be minus 16%. A lot of websites and apps, I'm pretty certain, take over 5 seconds. Pretty much the bounce rate, I think the average app or average website right now on a phone is something like 80, 90%. And yourself, when you're using your phone and you're pulling up, it's amazing the ones, when you're checking in or you want to check something online or you're using Google Maps, the ones that load really fast are the ones that you go back to time and time again, for example. So I feel like no matter what your app experience is, no matter what the device is, you have to be very, very careful about performance, because even though you may have the best app in the world, if you don't load, if you don't get there in time, you're going to lose the majority of your users. So I want to go through and I want to actually see some of this in action and some of the examples that we do. So I'm going to start with our actual corporate website. I know I think about 4 of you sticked up your hands about your own website. The majority of our leads come in via desktop, for example, but a lot of our, and I won't say what percentage, but it's in the, it's getting, the growth rate for our mobile and tablet leads is increasing exponentially every year. So for example, this is our Salesforce website. One of the things a lot of people do is, for example, like I said about the video, we have this beautiful video here that's looping in the background. If I was to actually, when I load, let me grab this. I have to come out of full mode, 1 second. Okay, here we go. If I was to actually load this on a phone, we don't have the same experience as it is here. So for example, if I was to drag this down and I keep going down, for example, we will actually change a lot in this. For example, our navigation icon, we'll use this stage left as we call it. You'll notice as well there's certain breakpoints where we bring back in our actual header navigation. And these are areas that you got to think about when you're actually designing for these individual tablets, etc. Another example is, like, for example, one of our product pages, and I got a beautiful survey right there, is you can see how it breaks. So, for example, on our product pages, when we're wanting to get customer information out, the video will play on desktop, but if I was to actually pull this down the phone, and I was to actually just like bring it up on the phone, we won't even pull in the video, for example. It scales down and it stops here, but you can imagine when I render it on a phone, we don't even pull it in. When the user clicks play, that's when we'll attempt to load in the video and show them that way. And this is all about trying to reduce the load time, reduce the bounce rate, and make sure that we get the maximum amount of conversions possible. When it comes to our product, we do the same kind of ideas. And so, for example, right here, were many of you at the keynote yesterday, Mark's keynote, when we saw about Salesforce 1 and Lightning? We build, on the user experience team at least, we build a prototype so that we can do usability testing with, get out in front of our customers, and we build it in a bunch of technologies, including our own, but we build it in HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript mainly. If you look at majority of, I said earlier on, companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., a lot of their apps are hybrid apps. There was a lot of, there's been a lot of media about, can a HTML5 app be as good as a native app? Is it, kind of the performance be? And honestly, it's been proven that it can be. In fact, even more effectively. As I said, instead of having different code bases, we have one code base that works across phone, tablet, desktop, even wearables and watches, for example. So in this area, I have loaded up our Salesforce 1 app. For example, we have our stage left, for example, where we have all our different menu items. But if I was to look at this app, and I'm using the Chrome browser to render this in, for example, an iPhone 5, if I click here, if I was to reload this page, this is for an Apple iPad. This is exactly the same web page, but completely different in the sense of how it renders and how it's viewed. Everything that we do, for example, we try to reduce the amount of images. As I said, we use SVG icons and icon fonts for everywhere across the product, mainly because of the retina. But it's also to give it as clean, as crisp as possible. Here's an example of working on a Samsung Galaxy Tab. I would say we do a lot of QE and a lot of testing, but the amount of QE and testing that we do, it's not feasible for us to test on every single device. And this allows us to make sure that when we design and develop this way, we can make sure that it's consistent across, let's say 80, 90% of the coverage on them. It also means that when something comes out in the morning, let's say Google launches a new product or Samsung brings out something new, the chances are it will probably work. Like, there's a very strong chance that it will work instantly on that device because we've designed and developed in this kind of responsive and adaptive way. The other thing, and I'm going to use Smashing Magazine as a great example as this. I talked about earlier is when people think about responsive, they think it's just about the layout changing and content shifting underneath each other. And that's not actually necessarily the case. For example, here we can see they have the navigation on the left-hand side. The user experience is kind of laid out the contents in the center. But as I start to stretch this page down, you can see that they got rid of the navigation from the left-hand side and they brought the navigation up to the top. The main reason for this is, they feel like the user experience should be tailored for certain breakpoints. It doesn't make sense that it would just be the same experience for everything and just squishing it down. And then if I continue to go down further, they drop the navigation altogether. They go back to the same way that we have with our navigation in a drawer on the left or right-hand side, and then you make the content the most important aspect on the page. One of the things that we do as well, and one thing that we're opening up to our partners is about components. When designing and developing, and looking at kind of user flows across all devices, there's certain things that we can reuse across every device. So, for example, this is I'm going to call our style guide for our Salesforce 1 product that we allow partners plug into so they can, utilize our CSS and some of our Lightning components. Right here, for example, this is the record home. We'll build modules or components using Lightning, JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and those components are what I'm going to call, responsive and adaptive components that we can plug and play and reuse in any area. So, for example, the feed post, for example, wherever we have a feed for Chatter across anywhere in our product, that is almost like one large component. It's like a jigsaw piece that we can pull together and build it. In the same way that, for example, that you're able to build, Visual Force pages in some of our places, you'll be able to reuse and utilize these components using Lightning and using our Apex code bases. It also helps us with development. So, for example, when we talk about development at scale, as I said, it's very easy for a small team, 5 or 6 to build one thing. But when you come to an enterprise level, when you need to scale these things and get it working across, hundreds of Scrum teams, as we do, it's very easy to break down individual components, like break apart a design, break apart a development process, and assign what I'm going to call either core components or individual items to each individual Scrum team. This allows, instead of one team saying, oh, I'll build this for phone, and then another team says, oh, I'll make sure it works on tablet, the teams are individually responsible, making sure that that component works across everything. This means we'll have a lot more accountability, and we actually get a lot more consistency in our build process and in our design process. In the same way that in developers, for our design teams, we build it, we do it in the sense of, we do it by themes. So, for example, we have a lot of products, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, the platform, Heroku, etc. Instead of us, deciding or assigning a designer saying, you're going to work on Sales Cloud, and I wanted you to deep dive on what a sales guy wants to do with the product and how we're going to utilize it. We don't do it by clouds. We don't, even though we seem like we do, we actually do it by themes. So, for example, a theme for us inside of our team is the idea of productivity. So everything to do with productivity is dedicated to one centralized design team. We have this, for example, tasks, notes taking. Those are two features that are utilized across multiple products. If we had teams, designers designing for one cloud, and then, they built a notes application over here, and then we had someone else on Service Cloud, and they needed to reuse it, they would build 2 different experiences, and it would be inconsistent across the different products that we have. So when it comes to scale, we look at that. We have one team that looks at productivity, tasks, notes, to-dos, across all of our products. We've been utilizing this for about a year now, and we're finding that it works much better than giving individual teams, as I said, features or clouds or whatever it may be. Another example of that would be our builders. So, for example, I'm sure you guys have used Site Builder or triggers. For example, you'll see it in an exact target. We have a thing called Journey Builder. That is one very, very complex piece of feature. But in the same way, we use the same design patterns across it. So it allows us to scale in a way, for at least in Salesforce, is even though we have hundreds of Scrum teams, even when a new acquisition comes on board, for example, let's say we acquire someone new in the morning, it allows us to be able to plug and play aspects or features into their products and find design consistencies across all of them. And also across regions. So like, for example, I'm talking about scale in the sense of products. How do you make sure that you have consistency around the world? We have developers pretty much in every country in the world, working in Asia and working in Europe. And this is one way that we can make sure that it's consistent across the world. We do have what I'm going to call ad hoc teams as well, who look at making sure that it works for a specific region, because there's certain subtle nuances based on regions, especially with right to left text, aspects like that, that will actually deep dive onto it. And in the same way that I said, our designers and what I'm calling our hardcore engineers, our UI services team make sure and look at it at an overall level. So the individual, like what I'm going to call global elements, like the Chrome or header, aspects like that. So that's kind of an idea of kind of where we are in our design process, in the design and development of of Salesforce. I want to open it up to any questions. I didn't want to deep dive too much into code because I feel like we could have rat-holed, but I'd love to ask if the audience have any questions on our process and how we do it at Salesforce, and how you guys can really take away from this, and how you guys need to look at your own processes inside your own business and really help to improve it, and hopefully get to to a better end result for your products and also for your customers. So with that, I think we have a mic here up front if anyone has any questions. Take a drink.
First, thank you. Appreciate it. What JavaScript libraries do you use? In other words, to me, it was more of a demo, but we didn't deep dive. So did you have any pointers as to where we could, I mean, you gave us 2 example websites, but...
So one of the things that we use right now when we're prototyping is we use a lot of Angular JS, just because of the speed that we're able to do for it. We use the normal frameworks of like jQuery, etc. We try to tend to, because we have such a focus on trust and obviously security, etc., we tend to only use the main ones and do a lot of it in-house as well. We have custom ones, but I think the main big ones, we'll use D3, we'll use jQuery, we use Angular, for example, for rapid prototyping. And then what we really will do is, we have our own framework as well, which is obviously our Apex and aren Lightning. So we need to be able to glue them all together in that way. We have a lot of different technology stacks, for example, platform, Heroku, etc. And one of the things that we're looking at as an organization, one of our biggest challenges, especially with, when we acquire a company and trying to bring them into the fold, is trying to get consistency across our code bases. It's a very, it's not as easy as you think. Like I don't see myself as a designer or developer, more of like a UX architect, because my job is to try and find and identify those inconsistencies and hopefully, slowly progress them onto a standard set of frameworks to make sure that we can bring them into the fold eventually. For that? Cool, you're welcome.
Hi, my name is
Alex. I have a huge light in my face, I can't see anything.
My name is Alex. We just attended the hackathon, first mobile app built on Salesforce 1. You were talking about loading speed, and we ran into the issue. We are loading content from a source into the app, but what actually takes long is loading the actual Visual Force page using Angular and this. Is there anything that's going to change with Lightning so things can be, the actual code will be cached on the device instead of reloading it every time?
Exactly. Like as I said, we've many servers, we've a lot of different kind of platforms and technologies. One thing that we're very conscious about right now is really upgrading, with Lightning, with the launch of it, is to really make it as fast as possible to consume content. We do not want us to be blockers on the gateway of where it is, and we never have been, and we never try, we don't want to be. But we want to make sure that as we go forward with future technologies and as the industry changes, that we kind of make sure that we have the most optimal solution to plug and play with everything. As I said, I always make a little joke where if I take a 2-year sabbatical and I was to come back, it's amazing how fast the technology changes. I think the bigger you are as a company, especially like Salesforce example, it's a lot harder to scale as quickly. And so with Lightning, because of our sites and force.com, etc., we're making a really conscious effort to make that as snappy as possible right now. As I said as well, we're working on, when it comes to performance, we've got 3 main areas. One is obviously what I'm going to call hardware, in the sense of the technology we use. One is going to be on the software layer, so really getting the latency down, the calls, the database, etc. And then the other one's performance, like the perspective or perception of a user. It's amazing how when we did our surveys with customers, when we just did the perception of lazy loading, etc., how much the satisfaction rating went up about our platform. We saw a huge lift in kind of customer happiness, so to speak, when we actually started to think about this lazy loading and loading in the sense of performance, in the sense of perception. So that's one thing we're working on. Obviously on the platform and Lightning stuff, hopefully you've got to see a taste from the hackathon this year. That Lightning is a lot faster than our actual force.com platform it is right now. Does that answer your question?
We didn't try Lightning. We just tried Visual Force, and we experienced it loads. The loading time of the actual page of the code is too slow, so way more than 2 seconds.
Yeah,
and I was hoping you can speak to whether that will change with Lightning. So will it cache code on the device or not?
I can't speak to caching code on the devices. There's a lot of subtle nuances when it comes to caching on devices and how you do it, etc. But we are, as I said, proactively looking how to improve the performance of everything as we do. I know you guys didn't get to play with Lightning in the hackathon. Obviously, the hackathon was before we announced everything. We couldn't really do that. But you will definitely see, huge improvements in it. I think as well, Force.com is a great product. And we're learning and still evolving it to make sure that it's future-proof for the future. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we still made place 3.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else? Are we doing time?
In terms of, you said, if we don't have time to do these things, but we should do these things. But a lot of what we struggle with a lot is Internet Explorer users. So, when can we stop worrying about them? How do you make the decision to say, I can't support 8 anymore?
So right now, it's very interesting in the sense of when we build our actual, our sales product itself, we still have, I'm going to call, especially in Asia, for example, there's a lot of IE6 big businesses. Officially, we only support IE7 and above as a company right now. We still support, IE6 in certain cases for legacy companies, especially in, very big ones. But we still look at it, and there is ways using the modernizer frameworks to be able to utilize media queries, CSS3. There is a lot of frameworks out there to allow us to do a lot of things. Yes, there is. We actually have a team pretty much who specialize in taking everything that we build, design, and develop, and making sure that it works across. Our QE team cannot wait till the day that everyone's on IE10 and above. But I feel like, Microsoft in general, who are, are a good partner of ours, and that relationship that we announced this year, are really making a huge effort to drive the new technologies. And for the first time probably in their history is really get on the standards as well. I don't think it'll be like IE6 where we'll have to wait 10 years before 7 and 8 has gone out. I feel like if we look at the world stats in the sense of consumers anyway, I think it's down to about 20%. So, 80% are on what I'm going to say is IE10 and above. And I feel like with the technology and the way the devices and as Microsoft itself, we'll have to bear with it for a few more years. But the way I think about anything that we design and develop going forward, it's almost more important to make it future-proof than try and necessarily fix it going backwards. Especially if you're launching something, as an MVP and you're trying to get feedback on it, especially from when it comes to devices. The great luxury about anything that's non-desktop is it will work with the modern JavaScript libraries, etc. From a desktop standpoint, as you said, though, we still need to worry about the 7s, 8s, and 9s. But I feel like the biggest issue there is mainly around media queries and CSS and being able to detect browser sizes, etc. And as I said, we can use Modernizer and a few other JavaScript frameworks to get around that. It isn't, I'm not going to say they're perfect, but it gets us about 80-90% there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Cool. I want to thank you again for coming out. I know this is probably not easy getting up at this hour in the morning, but enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll be around at the back of the room if anyone else has any more questions. Thank you.